Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Traversing the Stars podcast. Today's special guest is Sean Lewis. You know him as the writer of Bliss and King Spawn. He is now the writer of The Scorched. Now, come join me as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Lewis. Thank you for coming to the Traversing the Stars podcast. I've always enjoyed talking with you. I talked to you prior on a different podcast, and to have you for the first time on this one is a really big deal for me.
I appreciate it, man. It's always fun. Thanks for asking me.
It's definitely my pleasure. King Spawn is awesome. I've loved what you do with the character. It's the first, I think it's been 5 issues so far, have been stellar. And you are killing it from Bliss to King Spawn to eventually we're gonna talk about the Scorched. You are killing it right now.
I appreciate it. It's been a good creative year. I cannot lie. It's been fun working on King Spawn a lot. And getting the response. You know, I wouldn't call them concerns, but you know that it has a big fan base when you're entering it. You're like, all right, see how this goes. But yeah, you know, Todd has been really great and giving me a lot of freedom, and yeah, the audiences seem to really. It's been fun bringing back. I mean, I guess spoilers, but like bringing characters back and really getting to dive like deep in the mythos and some of the questions I always had about the character has been like, I mean, it's just been fun, honestly.
I mean, Spawn has enjoyed such a resurgence of popularity in the last, I would say, 2 years, where he's now back in the forefront of comic book culture in a way he hasn't been in a lot of years. But everyone is now Spawn. I mean, he's up in sales. These comic books are coming out and they're selling huge numbers right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely awesome to be part of that. I mean, it's a really strange jump to going from like, I mean, Spawn's that Image, so it is an indie comic, but going from like numbers of the sales of an indie comic are usually, you know, like if you're hitting 15,000, you're like, yeah. So it's kind of incredible to then get the numbers for Spawn on a regular basis and be like, wait, is that right? Like.
And well, like I said, and you just completed Bliss, which had hugely positive reviews, did really well. I mean, the last year has been the year of Sean Lewis. I mean, it's been you've had one hell of a year.
I definitely, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of writers I think that are doing some really amazing stuff, but I mean, Bliss was a real passion project. I was really lucky to get to do that with Kate Liniarski, who I'd worked with before and really adore as a person and is like such an incredible artist. It was a really personal story. So it's also nice to go from like such a personal, intimate, vulnerable story to then like, how many people is Spawn gonna decapitate this week? It was a really nice pivot.
Are you keeping a Spawn kill counter somewhere? We're like, he got his 100th kill in my book, King Spawn, 100th kill.
I definitely, like, as I'm going through, I don't have an exact number of it, but I think I keep a running count as I'm going through. My wife makes fun of me about it. She'll just be like, did a lot of people die? And I'm like, yeah. She's like, grotesquely? I'm like, very grotesquely. Like, that's how it's going this month.
Well, it's funny because, like I said, someone had read, someone's reading Bliss. They have one view of you. Now, if they have just read you from King Spawn, they're like, what is wrong with this fucking guy?
They might. And I think there's obviously, you can't hide who you are, so there's certain qualities I think between the two books. I mean, they're very different. I don't even know what that would be like to go from one to the other. But
so you've been writing King Spawn, I guess, for about minimum 5 months. I know this is up to 5 issues. I don't know when you first started cracking the story on the character, but minimum 5 months on the story. Scorched. You have your first issue coming out from the date of this interview, this Wednesday. That would be the 12th, I believe.
Yep.
So you've been working on Spawn for a little while now. As you've been writing him, what kind of insights into the Spawn universe or the Spawn character have you gleaned that maybe you weren't aware of prior to starting him?
That's a great question. I mean, it's been a long stretch. You know, I think Todd hired me before Thanksgiving of last year, so it's been a bit over a year since I started working on the books, and I was hired for both books basically at the same time. So I was working on them. King Spawn was a little bit before Scorched. I mean, some of it was getting, King Spawn was like I definitely had ideas of what I wanted to do with Al, and I had read Spawn in its initial early run. So there were characters from, I mean, anyone who's reading it like can probably tell because I'm bringing back characters who I loved and knew, and
Yeah.
kind of trying to reinvent them in ways and make them new again. And I always knew with the Kingspawn book, I was like, oh, I want to do a different kind of origin story. Like I want to bring them back to the beginning, but in a new way so that like longtime readers can be like, holy shit, where are we? What's going on? But I recognize these people and that's exciting. But also so that like new readers could just hop on and be like, I don't know who the hell Jason Wynn is, but like I'm curious, like I understand and can go with it. So I think like my understanding of the early mythos was really useful for what I wanted to do with Kingspawn. And then Scorched was interesting because I haven't done a team book. The first comic book I ever did was a team book, and that's the last team book I ever did. I did this book called Saints over at Image 6 or 7 years ago, and it was fun, but it's tricky. It's tricky to like figure out how to give everybody their shine and make everybody different, and keep it propulsive. Like it can really simply, I feel like in a team book, it can devolve very quickly into like either one person is the prominent person that we're watching and everyone's a backup character.
Oh, the Wolverine, as it were.
I mean, I think there's definitely runs and versions of books that we could point, that people can point to and go like, oh, that's like that run of that book, or that run where that character really, it was like you're saying, like this is really a Wolverine book, but there's a bunch of people with him. So, like it's a team book, but we're really watching Wolverine. And I think the other version of it is that like no one really steps forward, but there's no like the worst versions are then like no one steps forward as a character you watch, but even as a team, like it's a tricky balance of everyone gets a good amount, has their own story going forward. Because I think the other version is like no one steps forward, but you're not getting any propulsive story. It was trying to figure out like, okay, like who are the characters we have and what's the most exciting way to have everyone get a spotlight on them, but still keep a running forward momentum plot going. Like not getting bogged down in a backstory and a backstory and a backstory, but going like, no, what's the common goal? Why do they have to be together and still keep it going? And it's fun. I mean, it lets me also, I mean, in Kingspawn, I was using She-Spawn and Medieval Spawn a little bit. But it's funny, like working on a license, like on a licensed property, another person's creation, like Todd's creation, like it is kind of like being a kid again and just going over to their house and playing with toys, like a lot of my emails are kind of like, I'll send to Todd and be like, hey, I want to use this person. Like, can I take him off the shelf and like move him around for a little bit? And then we'll have a discussion. I mean, he hasn't said no to any of them, but like, he's also an amazing wellspring because I can ask any question of the past 300 issues of Spawn, or any character I want to bring back. I can just throw out at him like, hey, I remember this character from like issue 30. like, what can you tell me about them? I might bring them in, and he'll have like an hour-long conversation about the entire reason why they were created.
Well, I mean, the thing about Spawns, I mean, almost all of them, I mean, especially Al Simmons, but I think all of them, is that none of them are noted to be team players. They're all extremely ornery type individuals. Al Simmons is totally antisocial in many ways. How in the world are they functioning as a team? They're not likable individuals as far as being warm and friendly towards others.
No, it's good. It's because it's funny, like when it's like the Avengers, like there's a good natured like sensibility at the heart of it, where it's like we'll come together and work together. Where you're right, like with the Spawns, like they're definitively self-interested. But like the one thing that I kept going back to, and really gets into how I was approaching Scorched, was like, I was like, they're all soldiers. Like at their basis, like Medieval was a soldier. Like they all know how to operate mission. With that, like what's in conflict with that, because soldiers listen to orders, right? Like soldiers do what they're told, they work well as a team. So I was like, okay, they're all soldiers, so there's a part of that in their muscle memory. But then spawns are like definitively self-interested in what they want, which is actually great for a book because you're like those two things are just like constantly butting heads, and like who's the leader becomes a really fun game of like someone stepping forth and being like, I'm in charge of this mission, and everyone else being like, fuck that. Like, so I mean, for me, it was like, there's gotta be the working together as a team has to solve for each and every one of them the individual thing they need to solve, right? Like if Gunslinger's trying to figure out how to get back to the Old West and avenge his family, he's got to be made to believe by the rest of the team that their missions are going to lead to that. And if She Spawn's trying to protect her family and wants to find out more about what happened in Nyx, same idea, right? In Medieval, like they all have to understand that, like, yeah, I'm selfish. I don't want to work with any of you, but if I do, can I get to the thing I actually want faster? And then once that happens, that gets into the psychology of it. But then it basically becomes like a war book because they are soldiers. So like, I was actually going back and reading like a lot of I read a lot of Nick Fury Max from the Max series, and I was reading a lot of like the Howling Commandos and Sergeant Rock, like in the Haunted Tank, like a lot of old war books I loved when I was first reading comics. I was going like, and the Nom, I read that a lot when I was younger. So I was just going through all of that and going like, all right, how do I make this a really cool war book with spawns? That was kind of the idea.
Well, I mean, you have a team of spawns. My understanding of the team is She Spawn, Medieval Spawn, Gunslinger Spawn, Spawn, and the Redeemer. Yep. And those, once again, individually, especially Spawn himself, are massively powerful. I mean, Spawn has taken on Malabogio. He's taken on Heaven and Hell almost single-handedly. And then you throw in the Redeemer. How are you creating threats big enough for 4 spawns and a Redeemer to take and still feel like there's a threat that they're going to lose?
Right. That's a good, yeah. How do you create any threat when you've got 4 like beings that powerful? I mean, part of it is there's a much larger story I'm interested in, that there's a much larger world I'm interested in between King Spawn, the Scorched, Gunslinger, and Spawn, right? So like Rory McConville, who's great, who's working on Spawn with Todd right now, and then Todd's obviously doing Gunslinger, and I'm working on the other 2. Like we're in constant conversation, so that the idea is not just to keep continuity between the books, but I think it's also about keeping stakes and like understanding, like, okay, if you're doing that in Gunslinger and that threat's emerging, what is a threat that's emerging in Scorched that complements it or even threatens the other threat? Like what are the things that we can bring about that are big and massive? And the good thing with spawns too is like there's times where what I'm interested in is like they don't trust each other, so like there's definitely monsters and threats happening to them where they're like, okay, there's like people will see when they get the first issue, like there's other entities getting brought in where you're like, oh, that's a huge monster, and why are they doing this with it, and how does that relate to the spawns? And then there's going to be, once we get to issue 3, there's going to be some other secondary stories where you start going like, oh, each of their individual goals are getting messed with in a way that's disrupting the team. Like sounds convoluted, but it's like working together. The simplest way I can say it is like they learn very quickly, if we work together as a team, we can accomplish what we need and solve all the shit we need individually. But what's the real threats that start to break them up? Like there's a big, huge monster threat they're fighting, but then it's all the little like slashes to the armor that they each are getting in their own personal lives, where it starts to get like, we're getting at Medieval's past, we're getting at She Spawn's family, we're getting at Gunslinger's like need to go back, and also his complete distrust of Al, and we're getting at the fact of, does Spawn want does the ultimate loner want a team? And if so, what for? And even if he puts them together, do they want to work for him? Like, so there's all this conflict going on as they have this like huge entity growing in front of them. I mean, the big thing for me is just like that the antagonist just keeps growing in this organic but large way, issue by issue, where you start going like, oh shit, it was pretty big. I didn't realize it was this big. And then it goes even further.
So, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, like the Avengers, I guess also the Justice League. When you read those books, they're basically based on, a phone call. Everyone assemble. And they all come together. And they're like, hey, let's go out. And Justice League, they get the little air things. They're like, are you ready? You got to come to the tower right now. I got to fight the bad guy. In Spawn, I mean, are they? Is the story like they're coming together to do this, or do they just end up together during certain parts of the story? Like, or are they going to be, how close does this also weave into their solo titles, things of that nature?
They're definitely brought together, not by a phone call. There's no bat signal or anything. But part of it is like Spawn starts to stumble onto some things that she thinks might tie to them, and then it's basically up to her to like kind of convince them, like, are you, like, will you trust me? And a lot of them are like, I don't know if I trust Al. And there's this constant balance of like, does Al even know what Jessica's up to, right? Like, it becomes a fun kind of gamesmanship between all of the players. But it is very much organized in that way. And like, I will say sometimes in the books, we're going to discover them on individual missions. Like that happens a little bit in the first issue, is one of them is on an individual mission and the others show up and are like, hey, like we kind of need you right now. So that will definitely happen. And there's going to be times where people leave. And I think one thing I'm interested in is how fluid the team can be. There are a lot of spawns. I'm interested in a lot of them. And as a military tactical team, I keep looking at it as certain missions might demand different people, where you're like, oh, the person we need on this mission is not from the original 4. We need to bring in another entity to help us out on this terrain. And that gets fun for me because there's so many spawns. And honestly, like, not to blow the cover, there's just so many characters over the past 30 years who I know the fans love, because I love them. And I'm like, I haven't seen that person in an interesting, like in a big role in years. So what happens if I just like, boom, you're in the team for this, you're in the team for a little bit. And also, what if I move someone out of the team? I'm really interested in, like, what does that do to them? Like, do people leave of their own volition? Like, enough of this. I think the team sucks. The beauty of it is that, like, a spawn could fight the team. Like, it can kind of go in so many directions that I feel like there's a lot of storytelling possibilities. I mean, I'm still really interested in driving towards this idea of what Psalms 137 and the idea of Spawn becoming a king in the King Spawn books. I'm kind of interested in how that reverberates through everything, right? Like, what does it mean? He keeps being told, anyone who's not reading the King Spawn books, and people who are, like, I mean, he keeps getting told, like, you're the king, you should take the crown. He's like, and bad guys are saying it to him. So he's like, I have no interest in this. But it is a bigger question that, I mean, is going to keep getting explored in that book, that I think is going to have a lot of reverberations through the Scorched, and how they look at Spawn and how they look at each other. I think becomes like, it just gives me a lot of opportunity. And I think all of the books, a lot of opportunity to keep the tension high.
Now, as you said, especially in King Spawn, or Al Simmons' Spawn is being groomed in many ways to be the king, the ultimate leader. So the others, do they recognize that in him, that there's a lot going on with this one Spawn? He's obviously kind of a few steps up from where we were when we were Spawn, at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think they know that this threat is going on. They know, I mean, Medieval and Jessica, when they go with him in, I think, issue 3, they know that this, like, 137 cult like clan is, like, much bigger and organized than they realize. And they find the crown, and they know that his behavior is weird. Like, there's a point where he's making demands of, like, you guys go and do this, and I'm going over here, and they're just like, what's your fucking deal? Like this guy just we just helped him, and he's yelling at us, and he tells us nothing. And there's definitely, I think, elements of, how do we help them? Do we trust them? That I think, like, plays in that group. That I think is, like, just a good story thread that does run throughout, of just, like, I think even for the audience, it's sometimes hard of, like, what exactly, outside of just, like, totally destroying bad guys, what is Spawn's major motivation? And that's the thing I'm really looking at. You know, like when I took on the King Spawn book, I was really fascinated with Frank Miller's Daredevil run, like everything from when he first took over the book through Born Again. And I was also really interested in Garth Ennis's Punisher Max run. And in both of them, like the Punisher stuff was fascinating to me because I think like what I'm interested in Spawn is you have a character who's like bent on vengeance, but has lost the one thing that could make him stop. Like he can never get, both of them are characters who can never get vengeance for themselves because they lost. Like once Wanda's gone, Al, it's just he's just a machine of revenge with no end in sight, like no personal kind of salvo or redemption. Same as Punisher in the Punisher Max books, and that's really interesting to me. What does it mean if you're, you know, like like your main operating system, it has no end, no close point, like and what does that do to the people around you, you know? And that's a thing I'm really interested in, because a lot of them have to trust him. Like he's so powerful that it's like if Gunslinger, and he's closed all of the dead zones, so like if Gunslinger wants to get back to the past, Spawn's probably his best option, but the guy's fucking erratic and an asshole a lot of the time. You know, and like Jessica is desperate to like work as a team, like when she was a soldier, and be able to protect the people closest to her. And it's the same problem, is like, does Spawn even care about the people close to him? You know, like, so they all have these things where like, I need you, and there's times where I really believe and trust in you, but there's another part of you that is, it makes it so difficult. And Medieval's just, I mean, Medieval's fun because he's just so completely out of time. I mean, Redeemer too, like we'll come to learn, I just don't want to spoil it, but like there's definitive things he needs from Spawn, you know, and that's making him agree to what's going on. So I think, yeah, in terms of that, like that, and that goes into that reverberation, is Spawn is that kind of nexus point. Like he'll probably be the one in the book who comes and goes the most, partially because it's really hard, I think, to truly spotlight people if he's around, because like you said, he's so powerful. But he is this nexus point in the sense of like, we all need him if you're the other Spawns, but we all are fucking really annoyed by him as well. Like he's not the greatest boss.
Right. And you know, and I can't imagine that one of the interesting challenges of writing the Scorched is once again the three main Spawns: Medieval, Gunslinger, regular Al Simmons Spawn. I keep calling him regular Spawn, but I guess Al Simmons Spawn is probably the better word for it. Because once again, a lot of teams, especially as we understand in comic books, like I said, going back to like I said, the X-Men, is that the characters are defined quite often by either kind of archetypes or also their powers. I mean, climate control. Wolverine's got the claws, the eye beams. I mean, it's all kind of like just as much about their powers as it about them. The three main Spawns powers is pretty much similar, or at least from a similar source. So as a writer trying to differentiate the characters in a team, how do you differentiate them as people and also from a power source?
I mean, from power, the Spawn powers are, well, I'll talk about people first and then go into power. But in terms of people, you know, my background's in playwriting. One of the things I think about a lot, and that connects to that, is it's just point of view. Like it's going into each of the scenes and just going like, what's She-Spawn's point of view in this moment? What's Gunslinger's? What's Medieval's? And Redeemer's? And like, how are they all different, right? And so it helps. And Todd's great about this too. Todd, like whenever something's not working, he'll just like hammer me with like, what do they want? Just like, what do they want? Like they're making, like they're talking, but like, what do they want? I'm like, okay, that's a good question. You know, and it's the most important question. So it gets me into a lot of like how they differentiate. Like She-Spawn very much wants to, she helps put the team together. So she very much wants them to work as a group, because that's how she's going to get what she needs. And Medieval, I keep really leaning into the knighthood of him. Like there's a level of chivalrousness to him that the other Spawns don't have. There's a code of, they all have codes of honor. That's part of the good thing. They all have codes of honor, but it's a fascinating exploration of how codes of honor change, right? Like, so Medieval, the way he looks at a code of honor is like, if they're rescuing people and those people are cold and shivering, he's like, let's dress them up. Like, I'll give them something to make them warm. There's a way of which I will behave that knights of my era behaved, right? No matter how badass and hell spawned I am, I have that. Gunslinger, because he's from the old west, which is like totally pioneer, totally like, fuck everybody, I'm digging for gold. Like he has that, like, he's got a very, like, I'm getting the job done. I'm not listening. I'm not talking. I don't want to waste time. In my mind, he's like Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood. It's just like, I'm just moving. Like, I don't have time for this nonsense. Redeemer is like, I mean, so like, it's thinking a lot about that. And then like, obviously like She Spawn, you know, I got to develop Jessica a little bit in Kingspawn. So like, I'm very interested in her, of like how she's a modern woman, right? So like, she wants to be at the forefront. She deserves to be there. She's more than capable. She wants respect. She's not going to ask for it. Like, but she also sees the benefit of the team past like male bullshit. Like, that's the big thing with She Spawn in my mind, is that she sees all the bravado and she's like, I'm just as fucking strong as you. We don't have to talk about how fucking strong we are. Right? Like it's pointless for you guys all to be going like, I'm the badass. I'm the badass. And she's like, I'm also the badass. Can we talk about the mission? And Redeemer is this outsider. He's an anti-Spawn who's like, he has no real home. This is his first enemy, and there's a level of just like, I'm on the team, but I belong, you know, which is always fun to kind of, and also he's the one who I think doesn't understand. There's times in the book where he's just like, why did you do that? Like, why do you think that is a good mode of behavior? Because he's not. And then in terms of fighting, part of it honestly has just been to be simple, is like, I kind of broke them up and defined one as like, I thought a lot about it as a war book. And I was like, okay, one character would be as if they were the entire Air Force. Another character is like, they are the entire infantry. Another one is like SEAL team. And another one is, you know, like the total like covert ops. So you have one who's always on the outside sniping, another one who's using the air to fight, another one who's charging forward. So that way I'm able to, like, even if their powers are the same, the mode of attack is different. And even within that, like, I've been doing a lot of military research. So there's times within the book where the way they're attacking the enemy, I even get into a little bit of like, this is this type of attack from this era of war. Because it's been fun just thinking of like, these guys the Spawns have seen every era of war. So like, they would understand every way to attack an enemy, which even beyond their powers, I'm like, that would be so insanely useful. Sorry, it's a long answer, but.
Well, I mean, so many cool characters. Like I said, like as we said, Spawn himself, as we mentioned, him as a leader, is part of his story going to be learning to become a leader? Does he progress as the story continues? At least, I mean, are we looking at a 50 issue plan, a 10 issue plan on a storyline, or, you know, on his progression?
I mean, I would love to do 200. Like, you know, yeah. I mean, I've definitely been thinking of the books in a longer geared plan than like 5 or 6 or even 12. Like, they've been much further out in my mind than that to really build towards what I think we're thinking about. And yeah, I think the question of Spawn learning to be a leader and or failing at being a leader is definitely something that's happening as the book's going on. I think it's also, like, for me, it's really important to make it a place where the other characters, without it being a solo book for them, really come into their own in ways that I don't think you get as much opportunity to see on a regular basis.
And as you mentioned earlier, Redeemer as being the outsider, the outcast, right? I mean, he's the only character pretty much from heaven. How does, I mean, can he trust the other Spawns? I mean, he's got to feel really like everyone's like all the gun pointing at him, kind of, because like, you're the one that does not belong here. You are definitely the outsider. You were the enemy of pretty much all of us on some level. You know, I'm not maybe directly, but from who he works, you know, was working for, you know, obviously heaven.
I mean, for sure, he's definitely the furthest away, and therefore, in a weird way, it also allows him to be the most selfish. Where he's kind of like, I have a thing I need to get done, and I've spoken with Al. I'm like, I believe I can get it done through you guys, but he's also the one who's the least tied. Like if he needs to go, if he needs to turn, if he needs to do anything, there's always the chance of that until he gets what he needs for his own mission. You know, so yeah, I mean that plays in constantly, and the level of trust that the others have with them is also big, you know, like as they go into battles, and it's like, can we trust him above us? Like he's often being used as the air battle, as the Air Force, and there's a level of like, all right.
You know, and obviously, because I think one of the fascinating things about Spawn, I mean, the universe itself, is that your main characters are products of hell, which is not normally where the hero comes from in a storyline. Rooting for the characters, or are they actually doing something that we would be rooting for getting done?
I think both. I think definitely both is like, there's, yeah, I mean, the big thing with Al very much is like, he just kind of like hates bullies, like in the most simplistic of ways. I think that's why people also relate to him, is he's just like fucking, whether it's a Wall Street person who's like tearing a home away from an elderly person, or it's, you know, an ancient demon that's eating children's souls or whatever it is. Like, I was just like, you're a fucking bully. Like, I'm just gonna get rid of you. Like, you're a monster. And I think the big thing with Al which also makes a teen book interesting and is a big part of the Kingspawn thing, is with bullies, I think he has a wild mistrust of authority. Like, Spawn to me is like the ultimate in like individual. Like he does not want anyone to like impede on what he does, and I think he invariably he wants that for the universe he's part of. And I think within the Scorched, like it does break up. Their missions end up a lot of the times helping people. I think sometimes the missions just help them and are just fun and cool and exciting to look at, but there is moments where it's crossing over, and I think there's weak spots that each of them have, because they were all human at one point. And there's an interesting thing, I think that's an interesting thing to explore in the books, is they're all human who have lost their humanity to a degree, but everything they personally want is connected to that humanity that they're like getting further and further away from. Like even Gunslinger's like the one I look at the most, who's like, he's so badass that like he seems him and Al both seem really far from their humanity in ways that I think Medieval's chivalrousness and She Spawn's like She Spawn, her modernness make them feel closer. But even with Gunslinger, I'm like, I mean, he's lost family. He just wants to get back to that family he lost. Like, it's a very human ideal. And I think the fun thing to explore is as they get further from that, you know, and the fight because I think that's a fight we all have. You know, the world's really just strange right now. Maybe it's always like this. I maybe but I'm always looking at it, I'm just like, I feel like the level of humane behavior we offer to one another, it's always the social media stuff, feels to get smaller and smaller, you know, like which makes me feel like we're getting further and further from being people. We're more like cyborgs in our phones, and like, and it's creating less and less connection, which then I think breeds more contempt. And so I think that's an interesting thing that, like, not on a literal level, I don't think anybody wants to read the literal version of that, but I think that's a long running theme in so much literature I love, is like this allegory of like, I'm losing what it is to be a human being. So like, how important is the fight to maintain that? Right. Yeah. And I think with Al too, I think that's what I really am interested in the idea of like, how do you continue to fight the bully and therefore fight for the people who have nothing when the woman you love is gone and you don't have any of the things that you came back for? Like you definitively made a deal with the devil to come back solely for this, and now it's gone.
Yeah.
How do you, that was the one thing that kept his humanity, right? Like, and so like, I'm really interested in that. And it's a big reason why Terry had to come back in the book, is I'm like, I needed somebody who knew him, right? Like knew Al specifically. That also could call him out at times and just be like, you're a fucking asshole. Like, you're not being a person, you're being some hell monster. Like, because I think we all have that, you know. I think any of us that are lucky enough to have partners or family members we're close to, that's kind of what they do. Is they're like, you're not really being honest or true or authentic or real right now. And I
Mm.
think that's all saying the same thing. Like, you're not really being an open human being right now. Anyway, this is a whole philosophical bent that we're going that I'm
Each spawn, each character has a selfish motive for what they're doing. And they have common goals on some level.
sure.
But do the spawns want the others to achieve their goals? I mean, if King Spawn's goal is to eventually is leading towards almost a king-ish kind of thing, I mean, you got medieval spawn, you've got chief spawn. I mean, do they want the others to achieve their goals, or are their goals once achieved contradictory to what their own goals were going to be?
I think they're definitely going to be contradictory at times. And I think in other times they don't care. Like, and I think it's sometimes they will. I mean, I think it's like, it just makes great human drama to me. I mean, I keep thinking, it just makes me think of a lot of Shakespeare plays, especially the ones that have to do with kings, like King Lear or Macbeth. Is like, there's a lot of people who have different machinations, and it's like, oh, I really want Macbeth to get the crown. Like Lady Macbeth is like, my goal is not to be king, but like, I really hope that he achieves his goal because it will feed mine. And then you have other people around him, like Malcolm, who's like, holy shit, I hope that doesn't happen. I mean, not to get in, but there's a, you know, and Macduff, who just is like, doesn't really care until it affects him, right? Like anybody who knows Macbeth, like Macduff's another warrior who's kind of like, doesn't fuck, like, is it really bothering me? And then like his wife gets killed and he's like, oh, fuck it. Like, and there's a great beauty in that storytelling of like, I didn't really care until it affected me, which I think a lot of people live that. And then the regret and anger you have at yourself for letting it go. That anyway, it's a long way of saying that, like, I see the Spawn stuff, it's so big and mythical that like, I often approach it as if it's like one of those giant Shakespeare plays of like, some of them are going to get what they want. And sometimes that's going to like really fuck someone else over. And sometimes people aren't going to care that they're going for it and then regret it. And sometimes they're going to care and they're going to help and they're going to enjoy it together. Like I'm really interested in all the possibilities of that drama occurring within the stories.
Now, those of us who are used to the DC Marvel team books, I mean, I've read Justice League forever. Obviously, there's Avengers. There seems to be two major rules that these books always have. Rule number one, they do not connect to the major titles of the individual characters. Justice League is Justice League, Avengers is Avengers. The characters involved do not impact their major storyline. And the other major rule tends to be, if there's something significant that's going to happen to a particular character, it happens in the solo book. It can't happen in the team book. It's for the solo books only. Now, the Scorched, once again, being the Justice League Avengers of Spawn, do the same type of rules apply?
I didn't know those rules existed, so no, like that's definitely not how it's gonna be. No, I mean, I think it'd be really hard to write King Spawn and Scorched at the same time and not have echoes from each book, and treat them like they're totally separate. I never really thought about that. I mean, when you say it, I'm like, oh shit, that's true. That's true. I think also I'm just more interested. I mean, it's not dependent that you have to read both books. If you're like, I just like Scorched, I'm just picking up Scorched, or I just like King Spawn. I don't think it's broken by that. But for me as a writer running the threads but through everything, they have to bounce off each other. And I'm really interested in important stuff happening in the team book. I just think it's a great place for it, of like revealing characters who've been gone for a long time, deaths, bigger dramas, like, yeah, otherwise I don't know why we would do it. No one's told me not to at this point. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, because I mean, I like having read Justice League now for, God, I guess I'm 42 now, 30 something years. You do notice the patterns. Once again, if something's like, if Batman's going to have a big storyline, it's Batman's book that does it. The Justice League book will have Batman. They may reference it in a line or two, but it's not going to be a change in the Justice League book. It's not going to change the main title. It never plays backwards. You know, like you'll never see Batman and Justice League and something happens to Batman, and then in the regular Batman book, you're like, oh, remember that from Justice League? It's like, no, it never happens that way. It's always, a reference. The main title drives the character. Justice League is kind of like this special episode where it's like, hey, look at all these characters have fun, but nothing big enough can happen that changes anything in the main title.
No, one of the nightmares of my life has been trying to keep the timelines consistent, especially when with the supply chain there's delays. Like I'm literally looking at like, okay, if that's happening in issue 7 of King Spawn, like how is that relating to this issue of Scorched? And like if he has that injury in this issue, like how does that cross? Yeah, like so yeah, no, it's they're more closely tied, I would say.
So once again, I mean, I assume when we get writing Spawn, is it sort of like the old DC Marvel writing rooms where you guys are get the unit from the universe getting together discussing the next year of the Spawn storylines?
I mean, sort of, not really the storylines. It's kind of bigger, broader picture. Like, I think one of the things Todd does that's great is like there is a lot of freedom. Like, I kind of just let him know. It's also I just think how monthly comics are insane. Like I can't imagine as an artist. Like it's so hard. As a writer, it's just interesting because there's times where I'm like, I'll just be honest. I'm like, yeah, I got a little bit ahead on that issue, but like for something that hasn't come out yet, I'm like, I think I'm scrapping all of it. I think it sucks. Like, I think I have to go this other direction. So I'm always keeping them up to date, but it's not usually very in depth. The writer room's part of it is like, I guess once every 2 or 3 months, like me, Todd, Rory, and Thomas Keeley, who's the editor-in-chief, will get together on a Zoom and kind of talk about things that could, like, oh, I'm thinking of this in my book. Rory's thinking of that. Me and Rory sometimes hop on a little bit more often. And we talk individually more often. As a big group, it's more of getting on the same page of like, okay, that's happening in Gunslinger, you're doing that in Spawn. Sometimes it's literally just who are the toys. Like, okay, you're using those people in Spawn. I'm gonna do this over here in King Spawn. You're doing that in Gunslinger. Great. So I won't use your villain. And I guess that's where they are tied, because it'll be like, I'm not using your villain in my book at this point or yours. I'm doing my own, but he might relate to your guy in like a month. And so it's more of just like the making sure all the moving pieces are in order. I think that the more definitive planning happens on like one-on-one calls or emails.
Well, and since you're on the inside, I mean, once again, you're writing to the titles. Are there even more titles coming out in 2022 that have yet to be announced that you can wink and nod and be like, just let you know, be interested in this character, or just look out.
I can't get into characters. I think there's a good possibility there will be more books. I think that's as far as I can go, but I think there's a good possibility.
Are you gonna be writing any of these additional books potentially?
I don't know. That's possible too.
So, what can the listeners look forward to in Scorched? Basic storylines, maybe, or
sure. I think tonally, it's a big fun book. Like, it is a war book. There's a lot of action. Like the King Spawn book, like I mentioned the Daredevil Born Again. I was really interested in like how do I make a really deep new origin, like revisiting the origin of Spawn and make it kind of personal with all the fights and badassness that we love. And how can I dive into the detective and the horror of Spawn that I've always really loved. The Scorched, I was also like, how do I make the books differentiated? Like, how do I make them different? And like, the Scorched is big, it's loud, it's a lot of action, it's a lot of war, while keeping plot going. It's a lot of it's fun. Like, there's a lot of times where it's kind of like sometimes in King Spawn I'm going like, what's the most gross, horrific way I can get into this scene or out of this scene? Like, what's the creepiest thing I can do with that character that has a bigger echo throughout the rest of the series? In Scorched, a lot of times I'm like, how bonkers can I go? Like, how much fun can we just have with 4 insanely powerful characters running out on a battlefield? And that's where I feel like the books are pretty different. And in how they're operating the narration. King Spawn, I'm using a lot of first person narration, so we're getting deeper into King Spawn's head. There's a third person narration in Scorched, but it has a lighter touch. Like, it's got a level of like, this isn't going to go well. Like, a little bit of an awareness of the audience, I think, in that book, because you're watching so many characters, and it's kind of like a fun way of checking in with all of them. I think for the audience, but I think it's a big bonkers book where I just look at like how do we have the most fun, exciting war scene and keep the plot going at all times. There's not really down moments in the Scorched.
Well, like I said, I look forward to reading the book. It comes out Wednesday, January 12th, and I assume it's monthly, and every month will come out. So, Mr. Lewis, it was fantastic to talk to you again. I look forward to reading The Scorched, and whatever these additional titles are, wink, wink. I look forward to talking about them as well and reading them.
Man. Thanks again for having me on.
It's always my pleasure, sir. Thank you so much.